Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, a channel for all things magic. In this video, we are going to discuss the quintessential cards needed to build the core of a Cycling Matters commander deck with Kenrith the Returned King as the general. Kenrith the Returned King was the buy-a-box promo card for Magic's powerful and flavorful fairy tale set, Throne of Eldraine. Through his 5-color identity, Kenny can be called upon to be the general for any commander brew imaginable. If it can be built, then he can command it. As a creature, Kenny is a 5/5 legendary human noble for 4 and 1 white mana. As a toolbox, his litany of activated abilities include: for 1 red mana, all creatures gain trample and haste until end of turn. For 1 and 1 green mana, we put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. For 2 and 1 white mana, target player gains 5 life. For 3 and 1 blue mana, target player draws a card. And for 4 and 1 black mana, we put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. All of these abilities are functional and relevant, and in addition to his 5-color identity, are the reasons why Kenrith the Returned King is the single most versatile commander option in Magic. Here, we are going to inundate the core of this Cycling Matters build with numerous cycling synergies and payoffs. To cycle a card, we pay the card's cycling cost, discard it, and draw a new card. Since Kenny provides cycling options from all 5 colors, this build can be selective for the purposes of including the most impactful cycling fits for our theme. Our well-supported cycling engine, with its bevy of Cycling Matters rewards and win conditions, will allow us to claim victory after victory over our opponents. Let's begin the core of this build with a couple of cards that enhance our cycling theme. Whenever we cycle a card to draw a card, let's cycle a card to draw 2 cards instead with Alhammarret's Archive. We must have cards in our hand for the purposes of cycling, and this legendary artifact puts 2 cards into our hand each time we do so. Also, if we would gain life, then we gain twice that much life instead. Since the archive doubles the amount of life we gain, and we are crafting the core of a cycle-centric build, it makes sense to include Drannith Healer. Whenever we cycle another card, we gain 1 life, and then the archive doubles it to 2. Let's also not forget how the archive doubles up Kenny's own life-gaining and card-drawing abilities. Now let's talk about a slew of win conditions that synergizes with our cycling theme. Whenever we cycle another card, Drannith's Stinger deals 1 damage to each opponent. Note that we can cycle this card from our hand for 1 mana if needed. Whenever we discard a card, Glinthorn Buccaneer deals 1 damage to each opponent. It also has a built-in Rummage ability that allows us to discard a card to draw a card for 1 and 1 red mana. We can activate this Rummage ability only if this Minotaur Pirate is attacking. Whenever we discard a card, we put a +1/+1 counter on Bralin Skyshark Rider, and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. In this build, it is reasonable for us to cycle through more than 40 cards in a turn and defeat our opponents through these direct damage-dealing creatures. For the purposes of one-shotting an opponent, Zenith Flare deals X damage to any target and we gain X life, where X is equal to the number of cards with a cycling ability in our graveyard. Now let's utilize our cycling engine for the purposes of inundating our side of the battlefield with creature tokens. Whenever we cycle a card for the first time each turn, Valiant Rescuer creates a 1/1 white human soldier. Whenever we discard a creature card, Bone Miser creates a 2/2 black zombie. Bone Miser also accelerates our mana, as whenever we discard a land card, we add 2 black mana to our mana pool. Lastly, whenever we discard a non-creature, non-land card, the Miser draws us a card. Whenever we cycle a card, we draw a card to replace it, and each time we draw a card, the Locust God creates a 1/1 blue and red insect creature token with flying and haste. It also has a built-in looting ability for 2 and Izzet colors, and whenever the Locust God dies, we return it to our hand at the beginning of the next end step. Whenever we draw a card, we put a foreshadow counter on Ominous Seas. We can remove 8 foreshadow counters and create an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token. Note that we can cycle Valiant Rescuer and Ominous Seas from our hand for 2 mana each if needed. We also can manage our opponent's sides of the battlefield through our cycling engine as well. Whenever we cycle or discard another card, Archfiend of Ifnir puts a -1/-1 counter on each creature our opponents control. Note that these -1/-1 counters do not target creatures, so this effect dances around Shroud, Hexproof, and Ward, and also can remove indestructible creatures from the battlefield. Also note that this card can be cycled from our hand for 2 mana if needed. Whenever a player cycles a card, we may exile target creature through Astral Slide's triggered ability. If we do, then we return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Astral Drift follows suit whenever we cycle it from our hand, or whenever we cycle another card while Astral Drift is on the battlefield. Note that we can cycle Astral Drift from our hand for 2 and 1 white mana if needed. For some more cards that synergize with our cycling theme, Abandoned Sarcophagus allows us to cast spells that have cycling abilities from our graveyard. If a card that has a cycling ability would be put into our graveyard from anywhere and it wasn't cycled, we exile it instead. Whenever we cycle a card, we may have Crystalline Resonance become a copy of another target permanent until our next turn, except it retains this copy ability. Note that this enchantment targets any permanent on the battlefield, and not just ours. Shadow of the Grave returns to our hand all cards in our graveyard that we cycled or discarded this turn. This instant is considered a win condition in this build. So far, we have showcased our cycling engine, in addition to featuring various ways to win the game through its use. Now, let's enhance our theme further by making cycling even easier. Gavi Nest Warden allows us to pay 0 rather than pay the cycling cost of the first card we cycle each turn. Note that in a game against 3 opponents, we can cycle 4 cards for free in 1 round of turns. As a bonus, whenever we draw our second card each turn, we create a 2/2 red and white Dinosaur Cat creature token. As long as we have 7 or more cards in our hand, New Perspectives allows us to pay 0 rather than pay cycling costs. Note that this enchantment does not have any restrictions or limitations to when we can cycle or how often we can do so. As a bonus, when New Perspectives enters the battlefield, we draw 3 cards. Zerta, the Dawnmaker, reduces the cost of non-mana abilities we activate by 2, but this effect cannot reduce the mana and that cost to less than 1 mana. When it comes to reducing our cycling costs, Fluctuator is the gold standard. Cycling abilities we activate cost up to 2 less to activate. Note that this artifact does not have any limitations or restrictions for this cost reduction. Also note that, up to this point, each card with cycling that has been showcased during this video so far has had a cycling cost of 2 generic mana or less, aside from Astral Drift, which we prefer to have in play. This has been done purposefully in order to maximize our opportunities to cycle cards without paying their cycling costs through Fluctuator. In fact, filling the core of this build with cards that have cycling costs of 2 generic mana or less provides the potential to cycle through our entire library. Through this dynamic, if we have any of our aforementioned win conditions and or cycling synergies in play, then the game should end soon after. With that in mind, let's round out the core of this build with cards that have cycling costs of 2 generic mana or less. Remember, our goal is to cycle our cards. However, including cards with cycling abilities that have valuable interactive or utility effects when they are cast, if needed, strengthens the versatility of this build. Neutralize, countervailing winds, and miscalculation can prevent our opponent's plans to interact with our board state through the use of counter magic. Wilt, Forsake the Worldly, Shredded Sails, and Barrier Breach provide opponent interaction by destroying and or exiling their artifacts and or enchantments, while Shredded Sails can deal 4 damage to target creature with flying instead of destroying target artifact. Expunge and Radiant's Judgment can destroy target creatures our opponents control, while Lull and Angel Song can prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Repopulate has target player shuffle all creature cards from their graveyard into their library. We can target ourselves with this spell and return all of our creature cards with cycling to our library, which provides us with more fodder for our cycling shenanigans. Continuing our graveyard theme is Wander in Death, which returns up to 2 target creature cards from our graveyard to our hand, which again leads to more cycling. For additional utility benefits, Gilded Light gives us Shroud until end of turn. Flame Blitz is an enchantment that deals 5 points of damage to each planeswalker at the beginning of our end step. Migration Path puts up to 2 basic lands from our library into play tapped, and Reconnaissance Mission allows us the option to draw a card whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player. Creating tokens from our cycling engine is not the only way we could put creatures onto the battlefield. Remember, Kenny has a recursive ability that returns target creature card from a graveyard to the battlefield under its owner's control for just 4 and 1 black mana. Remember also that Zerda reduces the cost of this ability by 2 mana. Training Grounds does the same, and in conjunction, Kenny can return a creature from a player's graveyard to the battlefield for just 1 black mana. Since our cycling engine can discard creature cards with cycling straight into our graveyard, Kenny could have numerous targets from which to choose, and his recursive ability can cost as little as 1 black mana to activate it each time. Remember, the costs of Kenny's other activated abilities are reduced as well. For the purposes of recurring creatures from our graveyard, we include options that fit into our 2 generic mana or less to cycle restriction. Ridge Rannet is a 6/4, Yoked Plowbeast is a 5/5, and Vile Manifestation is a 0/4, but it gets +1/+0 for each card with cycling in our graveyard. Granitic Titan is a 5/4 with Menace, Lava Serpent is a 5/5 with Haste, Jungle Weaver is a 5/6 with Reach, and Rampaging Hippo is a 5/6 with Trample. Greater Sandworm is a 7/7 that cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, so there's no chump blocking this creature. Hollow One is just a 4/4, but it could be cast for free if we have cycled or discarded at least 3 cards this turn. Both Primarch Escapee and Angel of the God Pharaoh are 4/4s with flying. When Rooting Moloch enters the battlefield under our control, we exile target card with a cycling ability from our graveyard. Until the end of our next turn, we may play that card. Note that the text indicates that we may play the exile card. It does not require it to be cast. This means that we could exile a land with a cycling ability from our graveyard and play it until the end of our next turn, as long as we have an available land drop to do so. Speaking of lands with cycling abilities, the following cards meet the criteria for this build as they have cycling costs of 2 generic mana or less. Note that the majority of these lands enter the battlefield tapped, which does not help us to gain or maintain tempo. Rather than valuing these cards for their functionality on the battlefield, we value them more for their cycling ability, which helps to rev our cycling engine while also providing the potential of putting more versatile lands into our hand. Note that Ash Barrens does not draw us a card when we cycle it. Instead, we search our library for a basic land, reveal it, and put it into our hand. This land helps us to fix our mana by putting a basic land of the needed color into our hand, while also triggering our cycling abilities. Speaking of lands in our hand, Tectonic Reformation gives each land in our hand the ability to cycle for 1 red mana. This enchantment itself can be cycled for 2 generic mana, meeting the criteria for inclusion into this build. We can optimize Tectonic Reformation by tilting the construction of the land base towards red, as well as including as many 5-color mana-producing lands as possible. Through this dynamic, we can cycle land cards that otherwise would not have cycling abilities. This is particularly helpful if our hand is inundated with non-cycling lands, which normally would bring an abrupt halt to our cycling engine. If the ability to cycle through our entire library is not terror-inducing enough for our opponents, then perhaps including Unpredictable Cyclone and Herald of the Forgotten may uptick their levels of fright. Unpredictable Cyclone modifies our cycling engine. If a cycling ability of another non-land card would cause us to draw a card, instead we exile cards from the top of our library until we exile a card that shares a type with the cycled card. We may cast that card without paying its mana cost. We put all exile cards that weren't cast this way on the bottom of our library in a random order. Imagine the possibilities of cycling a card from our hand for free and then casting a card that shares a card type with it for free as well. And all at instant speed. Our only limitation is the number of non-land cards with cycling abilities in our hand. Herald of the Forgotten forges a different game-winning path secondary to our cycling theme. If we cast this 6/6 cat beast with flying, then when it enters the battlefield, we return any number of target permanent cards with cycling abilities from our graveyard to the battlefield. Imagine that our graveyard is teeming with permanents with cycling abilities, and at the end of our last opponent's turn, we cast Herald of the Forgotten for free through Unpredictable Cyclone's triggered ability. The game should end soon after. Hopefully, the relationships with the members of our playgroup will not. This video provided a blueprint for building the core of a Cycling Matters commander deck with Kenrith the Returned King as the general. The cards showcased during this video are suggested options for crafting the thematic core of a Cycling Matters EDH deck, in addition to providing ways of optimizing this theme. Removal spells, disruption, ramp, and the land base can vary from build to build, and also are dependent on metagame preferences and availability. In building around videos like this one, these deck components are left in the hands of each individual deck brewer. If you found this video appealing, then be sure to check out our other building around videos through the playlist on your screen. Also be sure to check out our other deck building series, and don't forget to let me know your thoughts about the core of this Kenny cycling build in the comments section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, a channel for all things magic.